technology is anything that wasn't around when you were born. Hello everyone, welcome to Pick a Book. Today is the part 2 of the Chip War book review, and I hope you enjoyed part 1. If you haven't already seen the part 1, the link is in the description, or you can check out my channel, Pick a Book, subscribe, like this video, and part 1. So today it's the part 2. We'll be covering chapters from 11 to 30. In the previous video we did from 1 to 10. And now we'll be covering chapters from 11 to 30, so part 2 of the Chip War book review. And today we'll be breaking down each chapter or a couple of chapters. Now let's start with the chapter 11 of the book, Chip War. While America was still fighting the Vietnam War, the key missile and the bomb, Sparrow 3 missile and the M117 bomb, was mainly used in America's Air Force. Now, according to some statistics, 9.6% of the Sparrow 3 missiles hit their target, 66% malfunctioned, and the rest simply missed. And same with the M117 bomb, because it was very inaccurate. Now, the key, you can say the goal of the Air Force was to strike down the San Hoa Bridge, a very important bridge that transported troops, the Vietnamese troops, and sent reinforcements. Now, the Air Force dropped many M117 bombs but couldn't hit their target and just left small craters. Now, Texas Instruments, a very important semiconductor manufacturer, Weldon Wood was an employee in Texas Instruments. Now, he was called by the Air Force to design him a very precise bomb so that they could strike down the San Hoa Bridge. Now, first of all, he added some small wings to the M117 bomb so it could smoothly glide, and then he added a small silicon wafer and a laser guided system in that bomb for precision, and the name of this chapter is Precision Strike. So he added a small silicon wafer, divided it into 4 quadrants, and a laser guided system with the silicon wafer to strike down the target. Now, when Air Force carried these newly designed bombs, there was a strike. The first hit of the bomb destroyed the San Hoa Bridge, a key aspect of the Vietnamese war, giving America the advantage. Now let's talk about chapters 12 and 13. Now, chapter 12, as the name suggests, supply chain statecrafts, talks about that only. And chapter 13, well, it's very important. It's named Intel's Revolutionaries. Now, in this chapter, we mainly talk about Bob Noyce and Gordon Moore, one of the traitorous aid group that founded Fairchild Semiconductor, as I told you in my previous video. Now, in a few months, Bob Noyce left Shockley Semiconductors along with his companions, and like that only he left Fairchild Semiconductor to start his new company. Can you guess what it is? Intel, the one that manufactures microprocessors for our PCs, laptops. Yes, that Intel. Now, when he founded Intel with Gordon Moore, he hired many Fairchild employees, like Andy Grove also. Now, Intel it started manufacturing its own DRAM chips. Now, DRAM chips are a type of memory chips. One is DRAM and one is NAND chips. So they started manufacturing DRAM chips and also entered in very small markets like the microprocessors and other small markets. Now, let's talk about chapter 14, Pentagon's offset strategy. Now, as I told in my previous video, when semiconductors were first invented, a major buyer was Pentagon, or the one that heads the military in America. Now, this chapter tells us how Pentagon strategized on developing its technology and kept pouring in money in new startups like Intel and other chip manufacturers in America. Now, let's talk about 2 key chapters of this book, chapter 15 and 16, which also gives us a little bit hint about the 17th chapter. Now, the chapters 15 and 16 tell us how Japan overtook America, mainly in the DRAM production. All over it took America in the semiconductors, all the semiconductors, but mainly in the DRAM production. So before Japan overtook, America was booming, its industries were booming, companies like Texas Instruments, Fairchild, and then Intel, it was founded. Everything was booming and America was number 1 in producing semiconductors. But as soon as Japan entered the market, it overtook America, and America fell short in mainly the DRAM production, as I told you, memory chips. Now, one more major component explained in the 16th chapter is lithography. Now, it's very crucial to understand that without lithography, chips cannot be made. Now, what lithography does is that it embeds millions of transistors into chips, and lithography is very crucial because when lithography develops, then only chips can develop, because as fine, as small, it can print many transistors. That's how the chips develop. Now lithography, GCA was a major company in America that produces many lithography tools for the world. But when lithographies like Nikon and Canon, which are Japanese brand, the cameras which we use now, Nikon and Canon, they overtook GCA by a lot. Well, GCA was producing many things, and I should say top quality things. But Nikon and Canon knew how to market these things. GCA didn't know how to marketing these things, and how to mass produce these things. So now when GCA was producing these things, a point came, a time period that GCA fell short and GCA liquidated. Not liquidated, it didn't liquidate now, but it was like, as the chapter 17 chapter, the title is, it was just shipping junk. Because Nikon and Canon were at the number one place in the world, because Japan was the number one DRAM producer, so were the lithography manufacturers. So GCA fell short, and overall America fell short in the semiconductor manufacturing as well as the lithography. Now let's discuss about chapter 18. Now chapter 18 is the crude oil of the 1980s. So one popular belief at that time was semiconductors or chips are the future. And another popular belief was that they were the driving force behind the future's technology. So you can say, as the chapter suggests, they were the crude oil of the 1980s at that time. Now, this is a metaphorical name for a chapter which explains semiconductors were a very important aspect of the technology at that point of time, 1980s. Now, that was a brief about chapter 18. So it discussed about how it was driving the force, as I told you, driving futures technology. And the technology at the time of 1980s, it was used in militaries, many business to customer products, B2C. So that's all it explains in chapter 18. Now going on chapter 19 and 20, which are death spiral, and chapter 20, the Japan that can say no. Now let's talk about the 19th chapter, death spiral. Now when the chapter starts, it's quoted that Bob Noyce says to a reporter in 1986, can you name a field in which the US is not falling behind? So this means the number one rival competitor, Japan, was at least half a decade ahead of them in terms of technology, which means at least 5 years ahead of them in technology. Now, what it was a very common thing, but America wasn't doing it, is that many companies collaborated together, the chip makers collaborated together, and they made a single chip by sharing their expertise and knowledge. But America wasn't doing it. So America created Sematech, a non-profit consortium which, like, collaborated with the top chip makers of America. And then the main motive of Sematech was to revive America's chip making technology to take the number one spot and defeat Japan in the technological war. Now, Sematech, well, as I told you, it's a very important thing. You have to have lithography tools to make a chip. Now, America still had one major lithography company, GCA, but it was still shipping junk because Japan's lithography producers, Nikon and Canon, were ahead of GCA by a lot of years, like 5 or 10 years. But GCA was still shipping and making those old tools which couldn't give America the cutting edge technology. So Bob Noyce was handed over the leadership of Sematech, and he poured billions and millions of dollars to revive GCA. And GCA met the expectations. It came up with the cutting edge lithography tools so that America could get the and make the cutting edge chips. But GCA did not have a viable business model. It had the cutting edge tools, but unless a major company signed a contract with it, it would spiral down and collapse. So no company signed a contract with it. Even Bob Noyce, who funded GCA, couldn't like shift his lithography tools from Nikon because he trusted Nikon. But because GCA didn't have a viable business model, so no company signed a contract with it. It didn't have a viable business model, and the company spiraled down to collapse and liquidated. So that was the end of GCA. And now America had to import lithography tools from other countries because it didn't have a major lithography producer. Now let's slide into the 20th chapter, a Japan that can say no. Now, after making billions and millions of dollars in the semiconductor industry, Sony's founder, Akio Morita, thought that America was arrogant, and that is why he wrote the book Japan That Can Say No, which is the chapter's title, because he knew Japan was dominating the DRAM market, which stands for Dynamic Random Access Memory, a type of memory chip, and all over the whole semiconductor market. So he wrote that book because he knew they were in a position that they can say no to the American collaborations and American deals. Now let's talk about a very consequential chapter in the book, chapter number 21, The Potato Chip King. Now in this chapter, as I told you, America was fighting with Japan in terms of technology. It couldn't get first place. Many businesses were shutting down. And there was a business which was about to shut down named Micron by two brothers. It was in the American state of Idaho, not in the Silicon Valley where all the other major firms, major companies of semiconductor manufacturing were there. The company was about to shut down, but an Idaho billionaire, Jack Simplot, who was a billionaire by farming potatoes, invested in the company so that he could profit from the company, because he said it's quoted in the chapter that this company makes the best and the best damn widgets yet. So he invested in the company so that he could profit from the company. So first he invested $1 million in the company, and later he invested many more millions and billions of dollars in the company. Now Micron got to know that in order to survive this cutthroat competition, they had only one thing left to do: cut costs rapidly. So they focused on manufacturing chips also and the technology in that, but they focused mainly on cutting costs because that was the only option they have left with to survive with the Japanese competitors. So they made the chips, mass produced them, and kept cutting costs rapidly. And this happened a lot of time. Jack Simplot invested, they kept cutting costs, and the funny thing is that Intel and Texas Instruments, the pioneers, you can say, of semiconductors, had so much creativity and innovation and couldn't compete with the Japanese, semiconductors fab. But Micron, who didn't care much about creativity, just by cutting costs, became a big rival in front of the Japanese semiconductors manufacturers. So these scrappy Idaho engineers kept cutting costs and finally scored a win for America in the cutthroat competition. And this happened just because of an Idaho potato farmer. Now let's talk about chapters 22 and 23. Now the name of the 22nd chapter is Disrupting Intel. Now, Intel was still in the DRAM market. Its main sector was the DRAM manufacturing. But, due to Japanese competition, it couldn't find the cutting edge, and it took a very risky move. And that risky move was exiting out of the DRAM market. And they then only focused on microprocessors for the new age PCs and computers, which are now used in our computers, and one of the biggest microprocessor manufacturers in the world, and one of the few only that create semiconductors, is Intel. So this was a very risky move, exiting out of the DRAM market and focusing on a very small sector in their company, microprocessing. The huge shift, it took a time, they thought about it, but then they succeeded, and you can see the result. Now let's talk about the 23rd chapter, My Enemy's Enemy, The Rise of Korea. So Lee Byung-chul, a Korean guy who is the manufacturer of the Samsung Group. When he was very young, he started a business of dried fish and vegetables. He brought that from Japan and sent it to northern China to feed the Japanese war machine while the World War II was going on. So he did this, but after some time, he started Samsung, which is now a major company in the world. So the thing is, in that America, created bonds with Samsung because enemy's enemy is a friend. So they wanted to overcome Japan in technology. So they created ties and started collaborating with Samsung so that they could take over Japan. Now let's talk about chapters 24 to 28. Now these chapters are essentially about how the new technology influences the military weapons and how they find the cutting edge new weapons of the time. Now before that, I like to tell you America now got the #1 position in the technology due to the Japan 1990 crash or recession, which led to various companies' stock market crashes, which provided America a chance to get on the #1 technology that it went and grabbed the first place. Now let's talk about chapters 24 to 28 in detail. Now these chapters are basically about, as I told you, how technology influenced military. Now, USSR still couldn't find the cutting edge because they still, like I told you in my last video, had the copy it strategy. They sent KGB spies there, They transported and brought back American chips and just simply copied it. So when they copied it, America was literally on another frontier. So they were at least half a decade behind America, which also makes their weapons less precise. There was the Cuban missile crisis, in that Soviets had a lot of quantity, but Americans had quality. So Americans had a lot of missiles which was very precise, but Soviets had a lot of missiles, they were not precise. So quantity doesn't matter if you have quality, which is technology at that point of time. And then a very important incident occurred which like created a benchmark for all like the militaries of a different world. That was the F-117 bombers when they strike at Baghdad. That created a benchmark so that they can match this with, then that showcase that America was on a next frontier of technological that improves their weapons technology, sorry. And then, of course, the Cold War tensions were rising and the Cold War took place. And yes, of course, America, due to its technological advantage, won the Cold War. Now let's talk about the concluding chapters of this video, chapter 29 and 30. So in chapter 29, a powerful Taiwanese minister K.T. Lee invited Morris Chang once again. He invited him 2 decades ago when Morris Chang, then an employee of Texas Instruments, wanted to set up a facility in Taiwan. So he called him 2 decades later after he visited him for opening a facility for Texas Instruments and told him that can he make a Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing company. And then Morris Chang founded TSMC, one of the biggest semiconductor manufacturers till date. You can search it on Google. It's one of the biggest manufacturers, and Taiwan is the biggest producers of semiconductors in this world right now. And then in chapter 30, it's just that after watching Taiwan's success, America's resurgence, and Japan also, the time when it was dominating American market, everybody, especially China, started building its own semiconductor fabs and started entering the semiconductor world. So that's a wrap, and I hope you all understood chapters 11 to 30 today, and I'll soon come out with a video from chapters 30 to 40 also, or 30 to 50, so that we can end this series. Hope you all enjoyed it. Akshat Malhotra signing off for today. Bye bye. See you in my next video, next part 3 of Chip War. Bye bye.